Cutting someone off completely isn't about revenge or proving a point. It's about reclaiming your space, your energy, and your peace. When you step back fully, your silence doesn't just protect you. It forces reflection in ways words never could, quietly breaking the ego that once took you for granted. Silence is often underestimated because we tend to think communication has to be verbal to be effective. Yet, in many situations, words become diluted, misinterpreted, or simply ignored. When someone has repeatedly taken your presence, attention, or care for granted, speaking more often doesn't clarify your boundaries, it blurs them. Silence, in this context, becomes a statement of power. It communicates your decision to step back without needing to argue, explain, or convince. It is a form of language that doesn't rely on approval or acknowledgement, but on presence, or rather, absence. When you stop justifying yourself, you remove the opportunity for manipulation or debate. Your words, no matter how calm or rational, can sometimes be used against you. They can be twisted, minimized, or met with defensiveness. By choosing silence, you withdraw that fuel. The quiet itself becomes a mirror, reflecting back the reality of the situation without any distortion. It shows that your value is not dependent on constant explanation or proof. This is crucial because many people, particularly those who rely on control or ego reinforcement, respond more to absence than to argument. They notice when something is no longer readily available, when energy that was once guaranteed is no longer supplied. Silence carries a subtle but undeniable weight. It communicates decisiveness and self-respect. Unlike words, which can be negotiated or dismissed, silence is firm and unyielding. It doesn't invite debate. It doesn't ask for acknowledgement. It simply exists, a boundary that cannot be ignored indefinitely. The person on the receiving end is left to confront the consequences of their actions without guidance, without justification, and without the emotional safety net they had previously relied upon. That confrontation is often the moment when awareness truly begins to emerge. Another aspect of silence is that it shifts the responsibility of reflection entirely onto the other person. When you've been present and available for too long, their ego can become dependent on your engagement. They may assume that your patience or attention is endless and that they can continue patterns without consequence. By removing your voice, you remove that dependency. Suddenly, the absence of your presence becomes the teacher. The quiet forces them to acknowledge what was taken for granted, but it does so without your interference. This form of communication is not aggressive, it's instructive because it allows reality to reveal itself naturally. Silence also protects your own emotional space. When you stop explaining, you stop reliving frustration, disappointment, or hurt through repeated conversations. Each time you argue or defend your boundaries, you reintroduce tension and stress into your system. By stepping back and choosing quiet, you reclaim that energy for yourself. You no longer expend emotional currency on someone who has failed to honor your needs consistently. That reclaiming of energy is not just restorative, it is empowering. It reinforces the understanding that your presence is a gift, not a given. Furthermore, silence allows clarity to emerge over time. The absence of constant communication creates perspective. You begin to see the situation as it truly is, stripped of the hope, rationalizations, or justifications that often accompany prolonged engagement. You recognize patterns that were previously masked by excuses or temporary improvements. That clarity strengthens your self-respect and reinforces the decision to step back. Ultimately, silence is far more effective than any explanation when it comes from a place of self-respect and decisiveness. It communicates boundaries, conveys value, and allows reflection to happen naturally. It doesn't rely on words, arguments, or emotional negotiation. It simply exists, firm and undeniable, and in that quiet, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. It is a power that cannot be diminished by ego, defensiveness, or dismissal, and it is one of the most profound ways to protect yourself while compelling awareness in others. Your presence is more valuable than most people realize because it comes with time, energy, and emotional investment. When someone assumes that your attention and care are always available, they fail to recognize that these things are privileges, not entitlements. Being consistently present has a cost, and that cost is often paid silently through patience, accommodation, and compromise. Many people take advantage of this generosity without even noticing. That is why removing yourself completely is not just a boundary, it is a demonstration of self-respect, a clear signal that your energy cannot be taken for granted. When you stop being accessible, the dynamic shifts instantly. The person who once relied on your availability can no longer count on it. Your absence becomes a tangible reminder that attention and presence are not automatic. It highlights what was taken for granted, and it often triggers a realization that words alone could never achieve. Presence is powerful precisely because it is finite, and withdrawing it without explanation communicates more about your value than any argument ever could. This is particularly important because presence is often misunderstood as unconditional. Many people believe that loving, caring, or engaging constantly is expected, without realizing the emotional labor involved. You've been giving your time and energy, often anticipating needs, smoothing over tension, and accommodating behaviors that may not have served you. When that investment stops, it exposes the imbalance that existed. It forces recognition without confrontation because the absence itself is unmistakable. Withdrawing your presence is also a form of empowerment. It removes you from a situation where you have been undervalued or overlooked. You are no longer negotiating your worth or trying to justify your importance. Instead, you are demonstrating through action that your energy is a resource, not an infinite well. That demonstration is far more impactful than repeating instructions, requests, or expectations that have gone unheeded. It is a quiet assertion of authority over your own life and choices. The withdrawal of your presence also creates space for reflection. Without constant interaction, the other person is left to sit with the reality of what they have lost. They may begin to notice the absence of your support, your advice, or your engagement. That absence becomes a teacher, showing the consequences of their own behavior without you having to point it out. This is a subtle but powerful way for someone to understand the value of what they once had. At the same time, removing yourself protects your peace. When you are constantly available, your attention is split between managing your own emotions and compensating for theirs. This dual role is exhausting and often invisible. By stepping back, you reclaim your emotional space. You no longer absorb the stress, uncertainty, or manipulation that comes from overinvesting in someone who does not reciprocate. Your energy returns to you, and with it comes clarity, calm, and a renewed sense of self-worth. There is also a psychological effect on the person whose access has been cut. People respond to loss more acutely than to confrontation. Words can be debated, minimized, or ignored. Presence, once withdrawn, cannot be debated. The ego feels the absence directly. They are confronted not by criticism, but by reality. Your attention, once freely given, is no longer theirs. That is a kind of communication that cannot be dismissed or argued against. Ultimately, your presence is a form of currency. When it is withheld intentionally, it carries weight. It communicates boundaries, asserts self-respect, and naturally compels reflection in ways words cannot. Removing yourself completely is not about punishing anyone. It is about recognizing your value and ensuring that it is not taken for granted. It is a demonstration that your energy, time, and attention are privileges, and that only those who honor them truly deserve access to them. Ego is fragile, especially when it relies on external validation. Many people, particularly those accustomed to having control or receiving constant attention, thrive on reassurance. Their sense of worth becomes intertwined with how others respond to them, how much effort is invested in keeping them engaged, and how readily they are prioritized. When you withdraw that reinforcement, the balance shifts dramatically. Suddenly, they are faced with a reality they cannot manipulate or control, and that is when the ego begins to experience real pressure. Men, in particular, often respond to consistency and effort more than they admit. When someone consistently shows patience, availability, and understanding, it creates a pattern that reassures them and stabilizes their perception of themselves. They begin to take that presence for granted, assuming it will always be there. When that availability is removed, the very foundation of their ego is challenged. The withdrawal acts as a mirror, reflecting what they once had and what they have now lost. Silence in this context is not about vindication. It is about self-preservation. You are not aiming to hurt someone, prove a point, or manipulate emotions. You are protecting your energy while allowing the natural consequences of their behavior to manifest. The ego reacts to what it cannot control. When they can no longer influence your attention, your responses, or your availability, discomfort arises. That discomfort is not arbitrary. It is a response to the reality that their assumptions about your presence were flawed. The effect of this is often immediate, even if subtle. They may begin to question themselves, wonder what has changed, or feel unsettled by the absence of familiar patterns. The quiet you maintain does not explain itself, yet it speaks volumes. It communicates that your boundaries are non-negotiable and that your presence is a privilege, not a given. Unlike confrontation, which invites argument or dismissal, silence cannot be easily contested. The ego experiences it directly, without the opportunity to rationalize or deflect. Furthermore, cutting off access forces reflection. When your energy is no longer accessible, they are left to sit with the consequences of their own choices. Patterns that were previously overlooked or excused become impossible to ignore. The absence of your involvement exposes the imbalance and highlights behaviors that went unchallenged when you were still engaged. This reflection is not guaranteed, but the environment for awareness has been created, and that is often enough to trigger the realization that what was lost cannot be casually regained. Detachment also strengthens your own position. By stepping away completely, you stop negotiating, explaining, and defending yourself. You no longer participate in a dynamic that undermines your worth. This removal protects your peace and reasserts your autonomy. When your boundaries are firm, your energy becomes steady, and that steadiness is felt externally. The ego, which thrived on unpredictability or control, now encounters stability, which it cannot manipulate. It is important to recognize that this process is not about punishment. The goal is not to break someone out of malice, but to honor your own limits and protect your self-respect. The quiet you maintain is a reflection of clarity, dignity, and independence. It communicates without words that your energy is valuable and it is no longer available to be taken for granted. Ultimately, the ego reacts most intensely when it loses access to something it relied upon. When you cut someone off completely, their discomfort is a byproduct of their own reliance on your presence. Your silence does the work naturally, without confrontation or drama. It allows reality to speak for itself while preserving your boundaries, reinforcing your worth, and asserting the quiet power that comes from stepping fully into self-respect. Detachment is one of the most powerful tools you can wield in any relationship, not because it punishes the other person, but because it protects your peace. When you are constantly emotionally available, responding to moods, chasing clarity, or negotiating attention, your energy becomes entangled in someone else's behavior. You are constantly adjusting, reacting, and investing in a dynamic that may not be balanced. Stepping back completely changes that equation. Detachment allows you to reclaim your time, your focus, and your sense of self without having to justify your choices or explain your absence. Being fully detached means that your emotional state is no longer dependent on their actions or responses. You stop needing validation, recognition, or reassurance from someone who has repeatedly failed to offer consistent respect. This doesn't make you cold or indifferent, it makes you centered. When you are centered, you are no longer reactive to manipulation, guilt, or inconsistent attention. You operate from a place of calm authority, and that calmness itself is compelling. People who are used to relying on your emotional availability often feel the shift immediately, because the energy they once took for granted is no longer accessible. Detachment also creates clarity. When you are fully immersed in someone's behavior, it is easy to rationalize inconsistencies or minimize the impact of disrespect. You may tell yourself it's just a bad day, or they didn't mean it that way, and in doing so, you dilute your awareness of the reality. By stepping back, you remove yourself from the emotional noise and create the distance needed to see patterns clearly. That perspective allows you to evaluate the relationship without distortion, making decisions based on what is truly healthy for you rather than what you hope could be. Another essential aspect of detachment is that it shifts responsibility back to the other person. While you were engaged, you may have been compensating for their behavior, smoothing over tension, or forgiving lapses repeatedly. This often allowed them to continue without consequence. When you detach completely, the natural consequences of their choices begin to unfold. They are forced to confront the reality of their actions without your intervention, and this can lead to reflection, discomfort, or awareness. The beauty of detachment is that it allows these consequences to occur organically, without you having to orchestrate them. Detachment also reinforces boundaries. When you cut someone off completely, you are communicating clearly what you will and will not tolerate. There is no ambiguity, no negotiation, and no justification needed. Your absence becomes a boundary in itself, signaling that your energy is finite and must be respected. This demonstration of self-respect is inherently powerful because it shows that your worth is non-negotiable. You are no longer available for manipulation, excuses, or half-hearted effort. At the same time, detachment protects your internal peace. Emotional entanglement can be exhausting, leading to anxiety, self-doubt, and constant overthinking. By removing yourself from the dynamic, you allow your nervous system to reset. You no longer expend energy trying to manage someone else's feelings or predict their behavior. Your mind and body are free to focus on what truly matters to you, your goals, your growth, and your well-being. Ultimately, detachment is a quiet but profound assertion of power. It doesn't need to be announced or dramatized. The strength lies in the fact that you are no longer participating in a situation that undermines your sense of self. The other person may feel the absence intensely, but that is a reflection of their own reliance on your energy, not a requirement for your peace. True detachment allows life to unfold naturally, consequences to emerge, and self-respect to take center stage, all while maintaining calm, clarity, and unwavering inner authority. Absence has a unique power because it forces reflection without confrontation. When you are constantly available, your presence can inadvertently shield someone from the full weight of their actions or behavior. They may rely on your patience, your explanations, or your emotional labor to maintain the connection without ever truly evaluating their own choices. By stepping away completely, you remove that safety net, creating a space where they are left to face the consequences of their own behavior without interference. This absence becomes a mirror, reflecting not only what was lost, but also the effort and care that went unappreciated. Reflection without confrontation is subtle but deeply impactful. You do not need to argue, remind, or correct. Your quiet speaks for itself. It communicates that you are no longer negotiating your presence or explaining your value because you understand it intrinsically. The person on the other side of your silence is left to reconcile with the reality of their behavior, often without guidance. This lack of mediation is what makes absence so effective. It is unambiguous and undeniable. It removes the possibility of rationalization or dismissal because there is no commentary, only the stark reality of loss. When someone is confronted indirectly through absence, they are forced to evaluate their own role. Habits, patterns, and behaviors that were once overlooked become impossible to ignore. They may feel discomfort, regret, or a sense of longing, but these feelings arise organically without manipulation. This process can lead to a deeper understanding of their own actions because it is prompted by consequence rather than argument. The absence you maintain acts as a teacher, illustrating lessons that words often cannot convey. Your quiet also allows you to reclaim your emotional power. In relationships where imbalance exists, it is common to expend excessive energy managing reactions, smoothing conflicts, or negotiating boundaries. Stepping away releases that burden. You no longer absorb unnecessary stress or compromise your emotional stability to maintain connection. This regained energy is restorative, providing the clarity and calm that enables you to observe the situation without attachment or resentment. Absence changes the dynamic not because it punishes the other person, but because it clarifies boundaries. It communicates value through action rather than explanation. You demonstrate that your attention, care, and presence are not commodities to be taken for granted. By removing yourself completely, you make it unmistakably clear that your engagement is earned, not assumed. This is a profound lesson for someone who has relied on your availability without reciprocating. It is important to understand that reflection through absence is not guaranteed to produce a specific reaction. Some people may resist awareness, distract themselves, or fail to recognize the significance of your departure. Yet the power of your quiet lies not in their response, but in the fact that you are no longer entangled. You step out of the story, and in doing so, you reclaim agency over your life. The absence itself is the statement, independent of the outcome. Furthermore, absence cultivates dignity and self-respect. You no longer justify your choices or defend your boundaries. There is no debate, no emotional negotiation, and no repeated effort to be valued. The silence itself asserts that your energy and attention are precious and finite. This demonstration of self-worth is inherently powerful because it removes the opportunity for manipulation while maintaining your integrity. Ultimately, absence forces reflection in the most natural and sustainable way. It is not about revenge or proving a point. It is about creating space for awareness while preserving your peace. The quiet communicates clearly and decisively, allowing reality to speak for itself. And in that quiet, both parties have the chance to experience clarity. The other person, through recognition of what was lost, and you, through the reclamation of your emotional autonomy and self-respect. Boundaries are among the most potent forms of personal power, yet they are often misunderstood. Many people see boundaries as restrictive, or unkind, but in reality, they are declarations of self-respect. When you cut someone off completely, you are setting a clear line that cannot be crossed. This is not about punishment or revenge. It is about asserting what is acceptable and what is not in your life. By doing so, you communicate a standard for how you expect to be treated, and that clarity is powerful in ways words cannot replicate. When you enforce boundaries through complete disconnection, you remove yourself from the dynamic that has been diminishing your energy or self-worth. You are no longer negotiating, explaining, or defending yourself. That absence signals that your emotional availability is finite and cannot be assumed. Your energy, attention, and presence are privileges, not entitlements. This realization often lands harder than any confrontation because it confronts the other person with a reality they cannot manipulate or dismiss. It forces them to recognize that the connection they once had is no longer automatically accessible. Setting boundaries in this way also protects your internal stability. When you remain engaged in a draining or unbalanced dynamic, your emotional system is constantly activated. You anticipate moods, adjust to inconsistencies, and expend energy that could otherwise be used for growth, clarity, and self-care. By cutting someone off, you reclaim that energy and restore calm to your mind and body. The peace you create is not temporary. It is a lasting shift that reinforces your sense of autonomy and self-worth. Boundaries also have a reflective effect on the other person. When you remove access completely, they are confronted with the consequences of their behavior without the interference of explanations or reminders. Patterns that were previously ignored or excused become undeniable. This reflection is organic and impactful because it is based on experience rather than argument. Your quiet communicates far more than words ever could. It shows that your presence and attention are valuable and that they are no longer available without respect and reciprocity. This action is particularly effective because it bypasses ego defenses. Confrontation often triggers defensiveness, justification, or manipulation. Words can be debated, minimized, or deflected, but absence cannot. The clarity of a boundary enforced through disengagement leaves no room for debate. It communicates a truth that must be felt rather than argued with. You will no longer participate in situations that compromise your dignity or drain your energy. Maintaining firm boundaries also cultivates self-respect. When you decide that you will not tolerate behavior that diminishes you, you reinforce the understanding that your well-being is non-negotiable. That self-respect is visible in the way you carry yourself, the decisions you make, and the energy you protect. It is a quiet yet undeniable signal to others that you are not available for patterns that are disrespectful, manipulative, or draining. The ultimate power of boundaries lies in their permanence. By cutting someone off completely, you are not signaling anger or seeking retaliation. You are affirming that your peace and self-worth take precedence. You remove the option for compromise that would continue to erode your energy. In doing so, you assert control over your life and your emotional landscape. Ultimately, boundaries are not a form of cruelty, they are a form of self-preservation. They communicate value, command respect, and protect your inner stability. When enforced through decisive action, such as cutting someone off completely, they compel reflection without confrontation and assert your worth without negotiation. That is the quiet power that transforms silence into authority, ensuring that your energy is honored and your self-respect remains intact. In the end, cutting someone off completely is not about punishment. It's about reclaiming your power, protecting your peace, and honoring your worth. Your silence becomes a statement, your boundaries a reflection of self-respect, and in stepping away, you create space for clarity, dignity, and true empowerment.